we tend to operate with a definition of hope that is hopefulness. It's kind of an idea of, I hope that something will work out a certain way. So you will hear me say on a regular basis at this time of year that I hope it's not going to snow. And when I say something like that, what I mean is, I really would like if it doesn't snow, but I can't control whether it's going to snow or not, and I don't know whether it's actually going to snow or not. So hope becomes this thing in our culture that is kind of this wishful thinking about how things might work out. And if you define hope that way, you'll realize that Christmas is full of it. Like the holidays is full of this idea of hopefulness. I remember that when I was a kid, where I would painstakingly craft my Christmas list with everything that I wanted, and I would strategically put certain things on the list for my grandmother that I thought she was more likely to buy me, and the same thing with my parents. And so the day would come that I would take my strategically crafted lists and I would hand them over to my grandparents and to my parents, and from that point forward, all I had left was hope. Like all I could hope was that I was going to get everything I had put on my Christmas list. And if I wasn't going to get everything, I was just hoping that I would get the things that I really wanted. Now, I was a really fortunate kid. I don't remember a Christmas where I didn't get everything that I put on my Christmas list. But still, I remember every Christmas Eve laying down to go to bed, just hoping that I would wake up the next morning and find everything that I wanted. And I think that idea of hope at the holidays isn't just limited to kids hoping they get what they want for Christmas. It's something that's all over our world and all over our culture, where this season seems to remind us that we as human beings are capable of better, that there's something inside of us that we can't seem to live in all of the time that starts to surface around this time of year, because this time of year tends to bring out the best in people. People tend to be kinder, tend to be nicer, tend to be more patient. People are definitely more generous this time of year. If you look at the statistics for nonprofit organizations that are supported by people's generosity and donations like we are, you'll notice that a fair chunk of the money that they bring in is right around this time of year. This is also the time of year where relational conflict that keeps people apart for the entire year get laid aside so that everybody can be together for Christmas dinner. There's kind of this hopefulness that exists at this time of year that maybe we as human beings are capable of something better, and then that hope goes away when the new year rolls around and everything goes back to normal. And what I want you to hear me say today is that definition of hope is not what Jesus offers us in hope. Like the gift of hope that Jesus wants to bring us is one that isn't hopeful about how things work out. It's one that knows how things are going to work out. It's not hopefully wanting things to turn out a certain way and then wondering what's going to happen. It's knowing that things will turn out a certain way and knowing that what is going to happen. Like if I can put it to you as simply as I can, I'm not stealing this from Eric, I promise. I had this written down before he said this earlier. Like Christian hope is not hopeful, it's certain. The hope that Jesus wants to give us is not hopeful, it's certain. And that's what we're going to see in our passage for today, where the Apostle Matthew, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, writes this for us. When the wise men had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." So he got up, took the child and his mother during the night, and left for Egypt, where he stayed until the death of Herod. And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and in its vicinity who were 2 years old and under, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping in great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. After Herod died, an angel of the Lord appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said, "Get up, take the child and his mother and go to the land of Israel, for those who were trying to take the child's life are dead." So he got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was reigning in Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Having been warned in a dream, he withdrew to the district of Galilee, and he went and lived in a town called Nazareth. So was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. Gosh, that's a horrible story, isn't it? Like, I can just imagine when I started reading that, some of you were thinking to yourselves, that's the passage we're going to talk about today? I mean, but this is part of the Christmas story. Like, don't miss that. The context of this story is that this is what happens immediately after the wise men leave, after giving Jesus those gifts. And yet, I don't remember the last nativity scene or Christmas program that had this in it because it's terrible. You've got a scared, evil man who is so desperate to maintain power and control over his throne that he murders all of the boys in a region under the age of 2 and sends a newborn and a married couple fleeing into another country as a refugee. And so I would forgive you if you're looking at me right now and you're saying, dude, where in the world do you get hope from that story? Like, where do you get hope from a story that most of us, if we're honest, would wish we don't have to remember and isn't even in the Scriptures? And what I'd like to do is I'd like to try to show you where we can find hope here, because I believe this story tells us that Jesus gives us hope for our yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So Herod was a real person. He was an actual person who lived in human history. He was known as Herod the Great. He was born in 73 BC and lived until about 4 BC. And what we see of Herod here was actually typical of his behavior. He was known to be paranoid about threats on his life and on his throne, so paranoid, in fact, that at one point in his life, he had his own wife and 2 sons put to death because he thought they were plotting against him. And so in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, we have these wise men who show up to Herod and they say, hey, the true king of Israel has been born in Bethlehem. And then we're told in verse 3 after that Herod is disturbed by this. In fact, that word disturbed is an intense one. It can be translated panicked. So Herod believes that Jesus is a threat to his throne, and Herod goes to do what he does with threats to his throne. He goes to try and kill the baby Jesus. And so he manipulates the wise men to try and get them to come back to him and reveal the location of where Jesus is so that he can go and snuff out the threat that he believes Jesus is to his throne. But thankfully, God's ahead of Pharaoh. Not Pharaoh, but he's ahead of Herod. Like, thankfully, God knows what's going on, and he sends an angel to Mary and Joseph and tells them to get on the run so that they can be saved. And when Herod realizes this, like when he realizes not only that, but an angel went to the Magi, the wise men, and said, don't go back to Herod. We're going to talk about those brothers at the Christmas Eve service, the wise men, shameless plug, come hear about the wise men on Christmas Eve. But when Herod, I've got stories all mixed up in my brain today. When Herod hears that the wise men have outwitted him, he snaps. He loses it. So much so that he orders the murder of all boys under the age of 2 in Bethlehem and surrounding areas, which is about the max age that Jesus would have been when this story happens. So again, how do you get hope from something like that? How do you find hope in a story like this? Simply by realizing that Herod didn't succeed. That in all of his evil, in all of his plotting, in all of his scheming, he did not succeed in snuffing out Jesus. This story, while it's absolutely a reminder, it's horrible, and it's a reminder of the terrible things that we're capable of as human beings when we try to maintain power and control and comfort in our lives. It's also a story that reminds us that God can overcome all of that. And that reality is what gives us hope for our yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So let me see if I can show you those things in our story. Herod was a madman. I don't think that any of us would argue with that statement. And so I don't want you to hear me trying to make some kind of direct comparison here in a second. But I do think that there's something in Herod that we see that most, if not all of us this morning can relate to. And that's the reality that for most, if not all of us, there are things in our past that we wish we could go back and fix or change. Like, there are things in our past that either happened or were said to us, or things that we've done or said in our past that if we could build a time machine, we'd go back and make sure that they didn't happen. Some of you have encountered a Herod in your life who has done or said some horrible things to you in your past. Others of you feel like a Herod because of something terrible that you've done or said to someone in your past. And for some of us, those wounds and those actions run a lot deeper than others. And the simple reality is that those things, whether they happened to us or were done by us, are things in our past, in our yesterday, that can define who we are today. In fact, a lot of times they color who we believe ourselves to be. Let me see if I can give you an example of that. If you've been around here for any time at all, you've heard me talk about the fact that I'm not the most handy individual. Like, I'm not the greatest at fixing or building things. And what I've begun to realize is the main reason that's the case is because of a lack of knowledge. Like, I just never had anyone come alongside me in my life and teach me how to sand things and how to paint things and how to swing a hammer and that sort of thing. But I spent the majority of my life believing that I simply wasn't capable of being handy. I wasn't able to fix things or to build things. So just let me give you an example of that. Like, I recently had someone to my house to do some work, and part of the work I asked them to do was to put a wall up that wasn't there before. And as I watched the progress on that wall getting put up that wasn't there before, I was pretty blown away by how in the world is all of this happening. And I was sitting there thinking, there's no way that I could do that. And the reason for that is because when I was young, I had a person that I respected a lot, and they taught me a lot of good things, but we were working together on something one day, trying to fix something, and they said something to me that I've cleaned up the statement a little bit. It had some non-Disney words in it, but I've cleaned it up for the kids in the room and those of you who might be a little offended at that kind of thing. But here's basically what was said to me. Study hard, Brian. Study really hard, because you're never going to do a thing with your hands. Yeah, okay. And that statement was said by that person that I loved and respected and taught me a lot of good things numerous times for the time that I got to spend with them. So I spent most of my life thinking I'm just not capable of those. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not talented or gifted in that. If you see me swing a hammer, you would know why I shouldn't be building houses, okay? Like, I'm not saying that. But at the same time, I just spent a lot of my life thinking I'm not capable of that kind of stuff when I've realized I am. Like, I actually can get around a little bit now because I've learned some stuff thanks to YouTube and thanks to some patient friends who've come alongside me to teach me some different things. And so while I shouldn't be building houses, I can be more handy than I am. And I'm convinced that most of us, if not all of us, have something in our past like that. Something that's been done or said to us, or that we've done or said, that defines who we are today, where some of you today feel like you're worthless because you had parents who told you you're not worth a thing. Others of you feel unlovable because you've done or said something that you feel is unforgivable. And I'm telling you, if you look deep enough inside of yourself, those things are at the very least have the chance to color and define who you believe yourself to be right now and how you act in your life. And the good news of this passage, the hope this passage brings you, is that Jesus can overcome all of it. That there is no wound so deep inside of you that Jesus cannot heal. That there is no action so despicable that Jesus is not able to forgive. Notice in our story that no matter how Herod tried, God was always one step ahead of him. Look at Matthew 2:13. When they had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. "Get up," he said, "take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him." Before Herod even knew that the wise men had outwitted him, God had already sent an angel to Mary and Joseph and told them, "You guys need to get going." He was moving to make sure that the evil Herod had planned to destroy the Savior of the world wasn't going to happen, because God was ready for it. He knew what Herod was going to try to do before it even happened. He saw it all. So much so that later in verse 15 we're told, "And so was fulfilled what the Lord had said through the prophet, 'Out of Egypt I have called my son.'" What I want you to see here is that all of that evil planned by Herod was overcome by God. Not only could God handle it, he was ready for it because he knew it was going to happen. The reason that will give you hope is, like I said, the reason that gives you hope is because that tells you that there is no darkness in your past that Jesus cannot overcome. If God can overcome what Herod was trying to do to snuff out the Savior of the world, then I'm convinced that he can overcome whatever is in your past right now that is defining who you are as you live today.